Before we do anything else, we need to talk about our application's URLs because this is how users will get to and use our application. So it is extremely important that our URLs are, first of all, easy to remember, second of all, easy to use. And since we are writing a Twitter clone, we have something that we can look at to get some ideas. We can look at Twitter itself. So let's go to twitter.com as if we were not logged in. This is what you see. It's a landing page that has two forms. One to log in, the second to create an account if you don't have one. And then once you are logged in, the same URL, twitter.com, takes you to your timeline. If you want to look at all of the people that I'm following, you can click on following, which takes me to twitter.com/following. We can do the same thing for followers, except that it is /followers instead of following. These things make sense, so we would want to replicate this within our own application. Now we can also view the profile of other Twitter users. All we need to do is go to twitter.com/ and then their username. Then if we wanted to see who they follow, we click on the following link, which tacks on /following to the URL. The same thing for followers. If we click on followers, then the URL changes to /followers. These things also make sense, and we want to replicate this within our application. The profile is part of the settings, so the URL is going to be twitter.com/settings/profile. We're not going to replicate that. We are going to get rid of settings, and we are just going to have /profile to edit our profile. So with those ideas in mind, let's go to Visual Studio and let's go to our route config because we need to set up the routes for these URLs. But before we do that, let's type out the URLs that we want our application to use. So for our profile, for example, we want our root and then profile, and then we want an action. It could be to display our profile or edit our profile. So we'll just use action there. We also need URLs for logging in, logging out, and signing up. Well, it kind of makes sense to put those things on its own controller. Those are account-related things, so we can have an account controller, and then we can have an action for log in, sign up, or log out. Our URL to display an individual user's profile would have the username and then an action like followers and following. So we will just use action there. For displaying the followers and followings of the currently logged in user, those things were off of the root. So we would just have followers and following. And then of course we have our root. These URLs almost cover everything except we need some way to create a new ribbit. So we can have another URL that is off of the root, simply called create. We can use these URLs as a basis for our routes. As you notice, I already used the URL parameter syntax used by the MVC routing engine. So the next thing we need to do is just organize these according to how we want to define them within our routing table. The general rule of thumb is to define the most specific first and then go all the way to the most generic. So the most specific are basically those that are hard-coded into the system. So like profile, that is hard-coded. The URL has to start with profile in order to go to the profile of the currently logged in user. So that is specific. The same for the account. For logging in, logging out, signing up, all of those things are specific. Now, when we get to this URL to display the tweets of an individual user, this is not specific because username can be anything. It's variable. So this should be defined close to the end. So next we have followers, which is specific, following specific, create specific. Root is kind of specific, but the username / actions should be defined before the root. So if we define our routes in this order, then everything should be just fine. So let's start with the profile. We want to use the routes object in the map route method. Let's name this profile default. And then the URL pattern is basically what we defined. Profile / and then action. And we can also specify defaults for this route. It makes sense for the profile stuff to be on a profile controller. So we can say that the controller is profile and the default action will be index because it is going to display all of the information for our profile. the name, the email, the bio, and all of that stuff. Then we will have another action for edit, which is actually going to edit that information, but we'll get to that whenever we write the profile code. We can use this same basis for our account, except we don't want to call it profile default, we want to call it account default. And of course our URL needs to change to account / and then action, and then the controller, it makes sense for this to be on its own controller as well, so account. But we really don't need a default action in this case, so we can get rid of that from our default object. Next up we have the followers and the following. We can call this first route simply followers, and the URL is simply going to be followers. For the controller, I'm going to use home, and I'll tell you why here in a minute, but let's first define these, then I'll tell you why I'm going to choose home. And then for the action, we will do followers. And we will basically do the same thing for the following, except we will call it following, and the URL will be following. And of course, we need to change the action method as well. The create is going to follow the same pattern. Simply replace following with create. The route to display an individual user's page is going to basically look like what I typed. It's going to have the username parameter. It's also going to have an action parameter. Let's call this user default, and let's specify the controller as user and the action as index. That's going to display all of the tweets for that particular user. Then we will have actions for the followers and the following. And then finally the root. Let's give this a name of default, and the URL is going to be an empty string. That's going to match the URLs that are going straight to the root. The controller is going to be the home controller, and the action will be index. Now, the reason why I added the following, the followers, and the create on the home controller is because I consider those home functions. Those are directly off of the root, so those are part of home. Of course, it might make more sense to call the controller root instead of home, but we will stick with home nonetheless. So we have 4 controllers that we are going to need within our application. We need a home controller, we need a user controller, we need an account controller for the logging in, logging out, signing up, and then the profile controller to display the profile and edit the profile. And so now that we have a game plan, we can get started with that in the next lesson.